In my Easter bonnet, with all the eggs upon it, I'll be the grandest poobah in my Easter parade. Happy Easter, boys and girls, and happy Passover. It's your old pal, Andy France, the grand poobah of Judson Sunday School, here with another episode of Virtual Judson Sunday School. Was the Easter Bunny able to make it to your home this morning? I hope so. I hope she was wearing a mask, maybe some little tiny rubber gloves or disposable gloves on her rabbit's feet. We have a lot in store for you today. We have the story of Easter, the story of Passover, some readings by several of you. We have a couple of songs to sing. We have a great children's story about a little butterfly by the name of Gideon. Let's see, what else have we got? Today is definitely Easter. For those of you who might be a little older, have you ever wondered where all this Easter rabbit stuff started? It actually originated, we believe it originated, with an old pagan goddess by the name of Easter, which was spelled E-O-S-T-R-E. She was the goddess of springtime and the goddess of the return of the sun after a long, cold winter. And the legend goes that she once saved a bird whose wings had frozen in the winter by turning that bird into a rabbit. And because that rabbit was once a bird, it could still lay eggs. Thus, an Easter rabbit and Easter eggs. Hey, nobody said religion was easy, kids. You may have noticed I happen to be wearing a gorgeous Easter bonnet. Easter bonnets are an old European custom they had where people would dress up in their finest clothes to celebrate Easter and the return of spring, to celebrate rebirth and new life. In fact, they had an old saying, I'll read it, "At Easter let your clothes be new, or else be sure you will it rue." In other words, you would regret it if you didn't dress up for Easter. New York City has its own Easter traditions. A lot of people will be making fancier hats than mine, much more elaborate, and parading up Fifth Avenue. Now, I'm not sure if the parade is canceled this year, but knowing New Yorkers' indomitable spirits and high sense of fashion, I can imagine there will be several Easter bonnets on parade later today, even if they have to walk about 6 feet apart from one another. Normally this time of year, we would be having our own Easter egg hunt. Obviously, we can't do that today, so instead I'm announcing a contest. Take a good close look at my hat. How many Easter eggs can you count? Maybe 10? Maybe 100? Maybe 500? You better count fast because they're literally falling off as I'm talking. What I'd like you to do is to email me your guess, your best guess, and the winner, the person who comes closest, will win this fabulous, priceless chocolate Peter Rabbit. So, this week, email me your best guess. By the way, when we all get together again, whenever that will be, I think what we should do are have jelly beans for everybody, just as a way of celebrating, since we're missing out on them today. So send me your best guess this week. How many eggs are on my head? Send it to Andrew France, Frantz, the number 1, @gmail.com. And next week, I'll announce the winner. Thanks. Well, I've lost my hat. Thank goodness. That thing was falling all over the place. And I think it's time for us to sing. I hope you have your picture lyrics for Manhattan. Those of you who are older and prefer reading, find your reading sheets, just your printed lyrics. We are practicing Manhattan in hopes that we are going to get to sing this on Kids' Day, which is scheduled for June 14th. I hope so. But for today, let's give it a go, okay? Here we are. Summer journeys to Niagara and to other places aggravate all our cares. Turn the page. We'll save our fares. I've a cozy little flat in what is known as Old Manhattan. We'll settle down, turn the page, right here in town. We'll have Manhattan, the Bronx and Staten Island too. Turn the page. It's lovely going through the zoo. 2, 3, 4. Look at Joali. It's very fancy on old Delancey Street, you know. The subway charms us so when balmy breezes blow to and fro. And tell me what street, turn the page, compares with Mott Street in July. Sweet push carts gently gliding by. The great big city's a wondrous toy, just made for a girl and boy. We'll turn Manhattan into an Isle of Joy. Turn the page for the next verse, and remember we go back to that original sound. Boop, bop, 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 bop. Here we go. Page 8, picture kids. Now it's early Sunday morning. Everyone's asleep and snoring, except me and you. What shall we do? Turn the page. Claude's patisserie is calling. Their croissants are our downfalling. But what if your goal is food for your soul? Turn the page. Here we go. We'll go to Judson and have some fun in Sunday school. Look at you kids. It's where the golden rule is cool. 2, 3, 4. We'll read some stories. They're kinda gory, like Sodom and Gomorrah. Turn the page. With lots more blood in store, like Samson or even Noah. Ask Russell Crowe. Turn the page. We'll buy a llama for someone's mama, and then we'll smile as we race baby Moseses down the Nile. Turn the page, big finish. Through all these lessons we hope to see just who God might have us be. We'll go to Judson, our Sunday family. Thank you for singing. Good. So, again, happy Easter and happy Passover. What exactly is Easter and Passover? Well, both are annual celebrations of miracle stories found in their respective religions. Christians celebrate Easter, Jews celebrate Passover. Here at Judson, we like to celebrate both. Now, I know you know what a miracle is, but I'll ask it anyway. What is a miracle? Sophia? Rocco? Right, virtual. So a miracle would be if I could actually hear Sophia and Rocco speak back to me right now, since I'm the only one here. Miracles are something unexplainable. They're extraordinary events. And as far as religions are concerned, these extraordinary events are caused by God. Miracle stories are ancient stories told from a time when, a pre-scientific time, a much more superstitious time when there was so much more of the world that was unexplainable. Although, believe me, there's still plenty about this world that's unexplainable. But don't get me started on our president. Ba-da-da-dum-bum. All religions have miracle stories. For Jews, you have the 7-day creation story. You have all the miracles of Moses. You have Noah and the ark. For Christians, you have all these miracle stories that are about Jesus, from a virgin birth, turning water into wine, being able to walk on water, all the way up through the Easter story. There was also feeding 5,000 people with just a few loaves of loaves of bread and some fish. For Islam, for Muslims, there's the story of the Prophet Muhammad being able to split the moon and also flying to heaven on the back of a winged horse. And of course, in Buddhism, which was 500 years before Jesus, you have the Buddha also walking on water, and the story of when the Buddha was a baby, every step he took, lotus blossoms came out from under his feet, which is why the Buddha was never allowed indoors. It's a jungle in there. Just kidding. So these are a few of the many miracle stories found in many of our religions, or a few of our religions. The one problem when it comes to miracle stories is that we tend to want to believe our miracle stories, the miracle stories in our faith, and not the miracle stories in the next guy's faith. We're going to talk about two miracle stories today, the first of which is the story of Easter. The miracle in the Easter story is the miracle of resurrection, the idea of coming back to life from the dead. And our good friend Charlotte is going to read the Easter story in just a minute, but before she does, let me set the stage. A couple of thousand years ago, there was a man by the name of Jesus who lived and was a traveling rabbi or a preacher. And he attracted a lot of attention because he had a lot of good ideas to say about God and prayer and forgiveness and loving your neighbor. He attracted huge crowds whenever he spoke. Well, all this attention also got the attention of the Romans, who ruled Jerusalem and the surrounding environs where Jesus lived and traveled and spoke. The Romans didn't like all this attention Jesus was getting. They thought he was causing trouble, and they saw him as a troublemaker. They just didn't put up with troublemakers. And so they eventually arrested Jesus. They tried him, they found him guilty, and they killed him, which is where the miracle of Easter comes in. And to tell us that story, here's our good friend Charlotte. Charlotte?
After Jesus died, a wealthy man by the name of Joseph took his body, placed it inside a cave-like tomb, and had a huge boulder set before the opening of the tomb, sealing the entrance. Guards were called to stand and keep watch at the entrance of the tomb. But early Sunday morning, there was an earthquake. An angel came from heaven and rolled the boulder away. When the guards saw the angel, they shook with fear and passed out. One of Jesus' friends, named Mary, came to the tomb early that morning. She saw that the huge boulder had been rolled away from the entrance, and so she entered the tomb. Inside, she saw the angel sitting there and became very afraid. "Do not be afraid, Mary," the angel said. "What have you done with Jesus?" she asked, for he was nowhere in sight. And the angel said, "Jesus is not here. He is alive. Go tell everyone." And Mary was filled with joy and did as the angel said.
Thank you, Charlotte. A toaster. I'm still not over that joke from last week. So our second miracle story is the story of the Passover, and it comes from a time even older than the Easter story, by somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,300 to 1,500 years. So how long ago was that for us? Let's do the math. Let's see, we have 2020 plus 13 or 1,500. Add that up. 0 plus 0 is 0. We got a 2. It's either a 3 or a 5. Let me see this. Okay, naught goes into naught. For all you Jethro Bodine fans out there, my head hurts. I hate math. Let's just agree it was a very long time ago. So I have a question for my elementals. Those kids that are in my elemental class, I know you know the answer to this, but who did people of, let's say, Old Testament times believe caused the weather or any acts of Mother Nature? I can hear you screaming through the internet. People of that era believed that the weather was subject to the whims of the gods, or in the case of the Jews, who believed in one God. And so, if the weather was gorgeous outside, it's a sunny day, maybe a little rain, just enough for the crops or the animals, God was happy. But if the weather was bad, you had a thunderstorm with lightning, perhaps hail, maybe a giant flood or God forbid, even a volcano. That meant that God was madder than a hornet, and you kids better get your act together. So I have one more question before we get to our story. What is a plague? A plague is a widespread disaster. For example, a worldwide disease. Good thing we don't have plagues anymore, huh? So, I've asked Owen and Theo and Sebastian to read the Passover story to us this morning, but before they do, I need to set the stage once more. The story of the Passover is largely the story of Moses. It's set in the ancient land of Egypt and at a time when the Jews were slaves of the Egyptian people. In fact, at the time Moses was born, the Egyptians were afraid that there were too many Jewish slaves in Egypt. And so they started a policy of killing all the firstborn Jewish boys. Wanting to save her son, Moses' mother puts the baby Moses in a basket and hides the basket in the river. And that's where we get our baby Moses boat races that we do at Judson Sunday School every once in a while. So this story has a princess in it. It is the daughter of the Pharaoh, or the king of Egypt. She comes down to the river to bathe one day, and she discovers the baby Moses in the basket. She picks him up, she takes him back to the palace, she adopts him, and Moses is raised as Egyptian royalty. It's only when Moses is older that he realizes he's not Egyptian royalty by birth, but he's actually Jewish. And one day he's out walking and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jewish slave, and it angers Moses so much that he kills the Egyptian. So now he has to flee for his life. He leaves Egypt and goes to a foreign country, or a different country. It's in this new country where Moses is now a shepherd taking care of his sheep, when one day he sees something amazing. He sees a bush on fire, and it's not like burning out. He approaches the bush and he hears the voice of God calling him from out of the bush, telling Moses to go back to Egypt and free the Jews from slavery. What happens next? For that, we have to ask Owen and Theo and Sebastian to tell us. Boys, take it away.
Moses went before the king of Egypt and said, "The God of Israel wants you to let his people go." But the king refused, saying, "Who is the God of Israel that I should obey him?" So God turned all the water red with blood, the rivers, the ponds, all the water. No one could drink, no one could bathe, they couldn't even water their animals or their crops. But the king would not let God's people go. Then God sent a plague of frogs in everyone's houses, in their ovens, even in their beds. Everywhere you looked, frogs. The king said to Moses, "Make these frogs go away, and then your people can go." So God made the frogs go away. But the king changed his mind and would not let God's people go. Next, God sent a plague of gnats, tiny annoying gnats, gnats by the gazillions. But the king just said, "Nope."
So God sent a plague of flies to Egypt. Flies were buzzing everywhere. There weren't near enough fly swatters in the kingdom of Egypt for all those flies. The king said to Moses, "Enough with the flies, Moses, they're driving me crazy. Take away all these flies and your people can go." So God took the flies away, but the king changed his mind again and said, "You cannot go." Then God sent a plague upon all the Egyptian animals. Their cows and horses and donkeys and camels all became sick. But the king would still not let God's people go. Then God made the Egyptian people very sick. They had red sores all over their bodies, but the king had a hard heart, and he just said, "Nuh-uh." So God sent a hailstorm. There was thunder and lightning and giant balls of hail falling down on everything and everyone. Nobody had ever seen hailstones this big. They really hurt when they landed on your head. The king summoned Moses and said, "Okay, you got me. Stop this hail and your people can go." But once God stopped the hailstorm, the king said, "Hail, no, you cannot go."
So God sent a plague of grasshoppers all over Egypt. Grasshoppers covered the ground, causing a crunching noise everywhere you stepped. It was so gross. Grasshoppers got in people's hair. They even got in people's mouths. The king pulled a grasshopper from out of his mouth and said, "Yuck, I hate grasshoppers. Get rid of them, Moses, and your people can go." But once God took the grasshoppers away, guess what? The king changed his mind. Even when God sent a plague of darkness to cover the land, it was pitch dark in the middle of the day. No one could see a blame thing. But the king would not let God's people go. And so God told Moses, "I have one more plague for these stubborn Egyptians. Go tell the Israelites that I want them to cover their doorways with lamb's blood. For tonight, the angel of death will come and kill your firstborn children of those whose doorways aren't marked. And you shall remember this night always." And that's what happened. At midnight, the angel of death came and killed the firstborn children of Egypt, even the king's son. But it passed over the Israelites' homes who had marked their doorways as God told them to do. And so the king had had enough. He called Moses before him and said, "Take your people and go." This time he meant it. And Moses led God's people out of Egypt.
Thank you, Owen, and thank you, Theo, and thank you, Sebastian. I'm not quite sure where they got that particular translation, but thank you. So both the story of the Passover and the Easter story are stories born out of the worst of times. First-century Christians were in mourning over the death of their leader, Jesus, and many were fleeing for their own lives at the hands of the Romans because of their faith in Jesus. As for the Jews living in Egypt, well, it's hard to imagine worse than the life of a slave. And yet, both are stories of triumph. Even in the worst of times, these people believed that God had not forgotten them, that God was present with them in their lives. Maybe that's a lesson for us today, that even for us in the worst of times, God has not forgotten us. God is present in our lives, even here in little old New York City, which when you think about it, is quite the miracle. So this time of year, being Easter and Passover and the coming of spring, is a time when we think about change. One fancy word for change is transformation. We see change or transformation happening all around us as the trees and the flowers are coming into bloom. And as people of faith, we see how our faith can transform us or change us for the better at this time of year as well. There's no better illustration of transformation than in the life of a butterfly. You know what goes on with a butterfly. Just happen to have a fancy little milkweed leaf right here. I hope you can see this with my clumsy fingers. You have some butterfly eggs on the leaf. The eggs hatch and they become these tiny little caterpillars. What happens when a caterpillar gets bigger? He looks a little something like this guy. So the caterpillar is eating away on this milkweed leaf until he decides, you know what? I need a house. It's time I built myself a home. And so he builds this beautiful chrysalis or cocoon, and he lives in here, and this is where the transformation takes place. Because a few weeks later, he emerges, or I keep saying he, let's go with she. She emerges a beautiful butterfly, in this case, a monarch. Our story today is about a little butterfly by the name of Gideon, and it's about Gideon's transformation from caterpillar or grub worm, as he likes to call himself in this story, to a beautiful butterfly. And it's called Gideon's Dream, A Tale of New Beginnings by Ken and Maddie Dykewald and Dave and Grace Zaboski. Let's read it. Not long ago, and not far from here, lived an ordinary, everyday grub. When the sun rose above the meadow and the wind brushed across the grasses, Gideon the grub would awake and go off to the trees for his daily grub work. Well, one day there was an accident. At least it seemed so. Maybe it was just written in the stars. Whatever it was, it sure was big, because afterward, Gideon was never the same. There's Gideon right there. Sorry. Here we go. That day, Gideon found himself out on the end of a beautiful red leaf. He was higher up in the trees than ever before. Then, without warning, the red leaf received a secret message from the tree. It's time. Let go. And the leaf did. It let go of its long spring through summer grip and began its spiraling drift to earth. It happened so fast, it took Gideon's breath away. He held on for dear life as he bounced through the leaves and branches. Then on a gust of the autumn wind, the ride suddenly got quiet, and not so bumpy, and not so scary. Wow, thought Gideon, would you look at that view? Gideon had cleared the upper branches and was now floating freely on the wind, moving gracefully through the open space between sky above and earth below. I can see the whole meadow from here, Gideon thought. His senses were wide awake. He even discovered that if he leaned this way or that, he could change the direction of the falling leaf. Gideon swooped past his friends as they were dutifully going on with their grub work. He shouted, "Look at me! Look at me!" But they didn't see him at all. I don't know if you can see this picture, but you see these two grubs doing their grub work? This one has a coffee cup, and it says, "Don't bug me." Way too soon for Gideon, the autumn wind got distracted by another windy thought and wandered off across the meadow to go tickle the reeds. Gideon's landing was a bit rough, and he was bucked off his leafy steed. He came up bumped, he came up bruised, he came up scrambled and tangled, and he came up delighted. Gideon raced back to the rest of the crowd. He tried to explain how he had been really scared at first, and then he saw the beautiful view, how he could almost fly. Yes, he, Gideon, a grub flying. Can you imagine? He kept saying over and over to anyone who would listen. And parents, did you notice this caterpillar wearing a cat hat? And you know what? Although many did their best to ignore Gideon, there were a few who could imagine, because the next day, another leaf drifted to earth, and it too had a grub on it. The day after, 2 more took the falling flight, and even more after that. Everyone started the fall in utter fear. You can see their being afraid faces, and finished in sheer joy, like this guy. Unaware of any of this, Gideon started having strange dreams. Dreams about flying. Some were good, some were not so good, and some were wacky. In one, he was snowy white, flying and honking high above the meadow. The whole world seemed to curve away from him like a giant colored marble. Gideon loved the feeling of flying, even if he felt he looked a little silly. Here's Gideon surrounded by geese. Another time he flew wherever his thoughts took him, up to go up and down to go down. He flew sideward and leftways, backwise and spiralish. He zoomed zippily and wafted lazily. And oh, it was so lovely and so free. Then Gideon woke up, and he was just a grub filling his days in the regular grub way. He worried that maybe, just maybe, the best of life was over. "Oh, what should I do?" Gideon asked his good friend Grace. "Is it too late to keep dreaming?" Well, Grace looked Gideon right in the eye and said, "It's never too late to dream." I don't think you can see this, but Gideon's drinking out of a Starbucks cup. Starbucks. Now what Gideon, I think I turned 2 pages. This is the hardest part of this whole job, turning pages. So Gideon said so long to his friends, hugged Grace, and left the grub work behind. On a quiet reed in the meadow, he built a small, cozy cabin. There Gideon got busy. He would figure out this flying thing if it was the last thing this little grub would ever do, because it was. Out in the meadow, you could see the glow from Gideon's lantern as he figured very late into the night. Even the fireflies got tired, and only the moon stayed awake to keep him company. Now, what Gideon didn't know was that he wasn't the first caterpillar ever to do this, and he wouldn't be the last. In fact, before long, the entire meadow was filled with the late night glow of grubs of figuring. Day and night, Gideon studied and sketched, yet found himself no closer to understanding flying. He thought he would take just a little nap to clear his head. Then when he woke up, he would get right back to it. So Gideon closed his eyes, and he fell into a perfect, dreamless sleep. Maybe it was the rooster's crow or the first warm breeze that tickled over the gray, green, and growing grasses. Whatever it was, something stirred Gideon gently awake. He noticed that his tiny quarters felt cramped. Oh, how he wanted to go outside for a breath of fresh air. Feeling hemmed in and needing a good stretch, Gideon began to poke his way out. Finally, and with great difficulty, he pulled himself free. Oh my, he thought, looking at the damage he had done to his little house. I'll have to fix that. But truth be told, he wouldn't. Gideon climbed up and stood atop the gently rocking reed. He felt quite wonderful, and maybe even better than he'd ever felt before. He shook out the stiffness, took a deep breath, and flexed his muscles. He arched his strong back, unfolded his vast wings to catch more of the sun and the breeze, and, wait a minute. Wings? Beautiful golden wings. Gideon gazed wide-eyed across the reed tops and noticed that there were others just like him. Some were struggling, some stretching, and some already fluttering. He even saw Grace, wings outstretched and gliding through the air. All around him, the meadow was awash in sunlight and the shimmering colors from 1,000 butterflies coming into the world. Just then, Gideon heard a forceful and quiet laughter come rolling over the grasses and out of the nothing. A whisper floated up, and Gideon heard it say, "It's time. Let go." The gust lifted him upon the breeze, and Gideon knew it to be the voice of the wind. He would return to this meadow someday, but for now, a new world of adventure was about to unfold, and with a whoosh, he let go. Spreading his magnificent golden wings, Gideon soared high into the sky. The end for now. Gideon's dream, a tale of new beginnings. So we come to our closing song, which is Be Not So Fearful by the English songwriter Bill Fay, with a couple extra verses added on by myself. But before we sing, would you join me once again in thanking Andre and Michelle for helping me put this virtual Sunday school lesson together for you. So in case you can't remember the lyrics, it's be not so fearful, be not so frail or afraid. There's someone watching you who will not let you fail. Be not so fearful, be not so frail. Sung a couple of times, and I'll shout out the second and third verses as we get to them. Okay, here we go. Let's sing it together. 1. Here we go. Be not so fearful, be not so frail. There's someone watching you, she will not let you fail. Be not so fearful, be not so frail. Be not so fearful, be not so frail. Second verse is be not so nervous in these perilous times or dangerous times. Someone may look to you in search of the divine. Here we go. Be not so nervous in these perilous times. Someone may look to you in search of the divine. Be not so nervous in these times. Be not so nervous in these times. You know what's making me nervous? I can feel my bunny ears sliding up the top of my head. Our next verse is be of good courage, you will prevail. The wind is quiet now, but soon will fill your sails. And there go my ears. Here we go. Ready, sing. Be of good courage, you will prevail. The wind is quiet now, but soon will fill your sails. Be of good courage, you will prevail. Be of good courage, you will prevail. So let's repeat that first verse. Here we go. Be not so fearful. Be not so fearful. Be not so frail. There's someone watching you. There's someone watching you. She will not let you fail. Be not so fearful. Be not so frail. Be not so fearful. Be not so frail. One last time. Be not so fearful. Be not so frail. Be not so fearful. And happy Easter and happy Passover to all of you. Thanks for being with me today. I hope we can all be together again virtually next Sunday. Have a great week.